Hey everyone, welcome back to USA News. I'm your host, and today we're breaking down a developing story that's absolutely shaking up Washington right now. We're talking about Kash Patel and what's happening at the FBI under the Trump administration. Now, Kash Patel has been one of the most controversial and polarizing figures in the Trump sphere for years, and his recent moves as FBI director or in his role within the intelligence community are causing major turmoil. This is one of those stories that has huge implications not just for Trump's administration, but for the entire intelligence community, for law enforcement, and for the future of how America's institutions are going to function. We're talking about potential constitutional issues. We're talking about political retaliation concerns. We're talking about the loyalty versus rule of law debate that's been brewing since Trump came back to office. Today, we're going to break down exactly what's happening, what Kash Patel is doing, why it's causing such a firestorm, what the potential consequences are, and what it means for Trump's presidency moving forward. This is not just political theater. This has real implications for how the government functions and for the preservation of institutional independence. So if you want to understand the breaking news that's dominating Washington, if you want to understand the controversies surrounding Kash Patel and the FBI, and if you want to know what this could mean for the Trump administration stability and for democracy itself, then stick with me because this is the complete breakdown you need. Let's start by understanding who Kash Patel is and why he's so controversial. Kash Patel is a longtime Trump loyalist who has worked in various positions within the Trump administration and has been deeply involved in Trump's political and legal battles. He's served as deputy assistant to the president, he's been involved in intelligence matters, he's been involved in the legal strategy defending Trump, and he's been one of Trump's most vocal defenders during the investigations and legal challenges that Trump has faced. Unlike traditional intelligence or law enforcement professionals who are trained to be politically neutral and to put the rule of law above loyalty to any individual, Kash Patel is known for his unwavering loyalty to Trump personally and to Trump's political objectives. This distinction is absolutely critical to understanding what's happening right now. The FBI is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to investigate crimes based on evidence and law, not based on political loyalty or the personal preferences of a president. The director of the FBI is supposed to put the institution and the rule of law above loyalty to any particular president. But Kash Patel's track record suggests a very different approach. He's been involved in efforts to investigate Trump's critics, to challenge investigations into Trump, and in the view of critics, to weaponize the government against Trump's political enemies. These aren't just allegations or speculation. These are things he's been directly involved in during his previous service in the Trump administration. So when Trump tapped Kash Patel to lead the FBI or to have significant influence over the FBI, it raised enormous red flags among people who care about institutional independence, constitutional governance, and the rule of law. Now let's talk about what specifically Kash Patel has been doing that's causing this turmoil. Since taking on his role, Patel has been involved in several moves that have shocked Washington and caused serious concern among law enforcement professionals, constitutional scholars, and those committed to democracy. First, there are reports that Patel has been pushing for investigations into Trump's political enemies and critics. This is exactly the kind of thing that undermines the independence of law enforcement and that threatens to turn law enforcement into a political weapon. The FBI is supposed to investigate actual crimes based on evidence and legal standards, not to pursue political enemies because a president or a presidential loyalist wants them pursued. When you have someone like Kash Patel, who is explicitly loyal to Trump rather than to the rule of law or to the institution of the FBI, making decisions about who gets investigated and who doesn't, that's when you get a politicized law enforcement apparatus. That's when the FBI stops being a neutral institution protecting American citizens and becomes a tool of political power used to attack political rivals. Second, there are reports that Patel has been involved in efforts to suppress or interfere with investigations that are unfavorable to Trump. This is incredibly serious because it goes to the very heart of how a democratic system is supposed to work. You can't have a president's appointee controlling law enforcement and being able to stop investigations that would expose wrongdoing by the president or the president's allies. That's the kind of thing that happens in authoritarian countries, not in democracies that are governed by law. Third, there are concerns about Patel's potential involvement in efforts to remove or demote career law enforcement officials who are seen as disloyal to Trump or who are seen as having been involved in investigating Trump during his first term or after. Career law enforcement professionals, people who've spent decades serving their country in the FBI and other agencies, are reporting being targeted for removal or demotion because they're not seen as sufficiently loyal to Trump or because they've been involved in investigations that Trump views as unfair. This is particularly troubling because it suggests a purge of the institutional knowledge and professional independence that makes these agencies function effectively. When you remove career professionals because they're not loyal enough to a particular president, you're destroying the institutional culture of the FBI and turning it into just another political agency. Let me explain why all of this matters and why it's causing such a firestorm in Washington and beyond. The independence of law enforcement and intelligence agencies is absolutely fundamental to how a democratic system works and how it protects its citizens. If the president can use the FBI to investigate his political enemies and to suppress investigations into himself and his allies, then you no longer have rule of law. You have rule by the president. You have authoritarianism. You have the kind of government that exists in countries like Russia, China, and other authoritarian regimes where law enforcement is used to eliminate political opposition. This isn't just theoretical discussion. There are specific documented examples of what Kash Patel has been involved in that are causing serious concern. During Trump's first term, Patel was involved in efforts to investigate the origins of the Russia investigation and to investigate the investigators themselves. Now, there was a legitimate investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller into whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia and whether Trump obstructed justice in connection with the Russia investigation. But Patel was part of efforts to turn this around and to investigate the investigators. This is a classic tactic used in authoritarian countries when faced with investigations into government misconduct. You investigate the investigators, you try to discredit them, you try to disempower them, and you try to avoid accountability. Patel was also involved in the Ukraine matter. When the Trump administration withheld military aid from Ukraine to try to pressure Ukraine to announce investigations into Trump's political rival Joe Biden, Patel was involved in the communications around this. He was involved in efforts to conceal what was happening and to defend the president's actions. These aren't just accusations or partisan interpretations. These are documented events that have been investigated by Congress, that have been reported extensively in the media, and that have been confirmed by multiple witnesses. So now when Kash Patel is in a position of significant authority over the FBI, people who care about the rule of law and about preserving democratic institutions are rightfully concerned about what he might do with this power. What's particularly troubling is that Kash Patel has indicated his intention to use his position to pursue Trump's enemies. He has talked publicly about investigating former officials from the Obama and Biden administrations. He has discussed going after people who were involved in various investigations into Trump. Now, here's the critical question. If these officials committed crimes, they absolutely should be investigated and prosecuted. But the question is whether they're being investigated based on evidence of actual crimes or whether they're being investigated because they've been critical of Trump, or because Trump wants revenge against them. That distinction is absolutely critical to understanding whether we still have rule of law in America. In a rule of law system, you investigate people because there's evidence of a crime and because prosecutors believe they can prove the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. In an authoritarian system, you investigate people because they're politically inconvenient or because they've offended the president. And with someone like Kash Patel in a position of authority over the FBI, there's a serious risk that we're moving toward the latter approach. There have also been reports that Patel has been pushing for the declassification of documents related to various investigations and legal matters. Now, declassification itself isn't necessarily bad or inappropriate. Presidents do have the power to declassify documents. But when declassification is done for the purpose of attacking your political enemies or of protecting yourself from investigations, that's when it becomes problematic and raises serious constitutional concerns. Declassification shouldn't be used as a tool of political warfare. It shouldn't be used to expose your enemies while protecting yourself. It should be used when there's a legitimate public interest in the information being disclosed. Let's talk about some of the specific concerns that have been raised by legal experts, law enforcement professionals, and constitutional scholars. First, there's the constitutional concern about the separation of powers and the independence of law enforcement. The FBI is supposed to be independent from direct political control by the president. While the FBI director technically serves at the pleasure of the president and can be fired by the president, there's a whole structure of law, tradition, and institutional practice that's designed to insulate the FBI from direct political control and to protect the independence of law enforcement. This includes things like the Justice Department's Inspector General Office, the Office of Legal Counsel, rules about how investigations can be initiated and conducted, and a professional culture within the FBI that emphasizes the rule of law over political loyalty. Kash Patel's approach seems to ignore or actively undermine these protections. Second, there's the concern about political retaliation and the chilling of dissent. Trump and people around Trump have indicated that they want to prosecute Trump's critics in the media, Trump's critics in Congress, Trump's critics in the bureaucracy, and Trump's critics in the opposition party. If the FBI becomes a tool for pursuing Trump's political opponents, that's something that violates fundamental democratic principles and that would chill free speech and dissent throughout American society. People would become afraid to criticize the government because they fear legal retaliation. Third, there's the concern about the integrity of the intelligence and law enforcement systems. Career professionals in these agencies are trained and committed to putting the rule of law first. But if they're working under someone like Kash Patel, who is explicitly putting loyalty to Trump first and rule of law second, that creates internal conflict, undermines morale, and fundamentally damages the mission of these agencies. Good people will leave, institutional knowledge will be lost, and the effectiveness of the FBI will decline. Fourth, there's the concern about international implications. American allies rely on the FBI and other intelligence agencies being professional, unbiased, and committed to the rule of law. If these agencies become politicized and become tools of the president's personal agenda, it damages America's standing internationally, makes it harder for the U.S. to work effectively with allies, and undermines America's ability to advocate for democracy and human rights internationally. Now let's talk about what Trump is saying about all this and how Trump is defending Kash Patel and his actions. Trump has defended Kash Patel extensively and vociferously. Trump views Patel as loyal, trustworthy, and competent. And from Trump's perspective, loyalty is what matters most in appointments. Trump is angry at the FBI for investigating him during his first term and for the investigations that have continued after he left office. Trump views the Russia investigation, the investigations into his conduct regarding classified documents, and the investigations into January 6th as politically motivated witch hunts designed to harm him and his family. So Trump wants someone running the FBI who will be loyal to Trump and who will focus on investigating Trump's enemies and critics rather than investigating Trump or his allies. This is understandable from Trump's personal perspective. If you believe you've been unfairly targeted, you want allies in positions of power. But it's deeply problematic from the perspective of the rule of law, institutional independence, and democratic governance. Trump's argument is essentially that the previous investigations into him were unfair and politically motivated, so it's justified for him to use the FBI to investigate his enemies. But this is a tit-for-tat cycle that will ultimately destroy the independence of these institutions, and that will undermine the foundation of democratic governance. If every president uses law enforcement to investigate their predecessors' political enemies, you eventually end up with a system where law enforcement is just another tool of political power, where the rule of law means whatever the president wants it to mean, and where your freedom depends on whether the current president likes you or not. Let's talk about the reactions to Kash Patel's moves and the turmoil it's causing. Career law enforcement professionals have been deeply alarmed by what's happening. Retired FBI officials have spoken out publicly about the dangers of what's unfolding. Retired Justice Department officials have expressed serious concern. Former attorneys general from both Democratic and Republican administrations have made statements about the threat to the rule of law. Congressional Democrats have called for oversight and investigation into what's happening at the FBI under Patel's leadership. Even some Republicans have expressed concern, though many Republicans support Kash Patel and view him as someone who will finally hold Trump's critics accountable for what Republicans view as politically motivated investigations into Trump. So you have a real divide here, and it reflects a fundamental disagreement about how American democracy is supposed to work. On one side, you have people who believe that the rule of law is being undermined, that loyalty to an individual is replacing commitment to the Constitution, and that Kash Patel's actions are dangerous to democracy and to the survival of independent institutions. On the other side, you have Trump supporters who believe that the previous investigations into Trump were unfair and politically motivated, that Trump and his allies were treated unjustly, and that it's therefore justified for Trump to have loyalists in positions of power who will investigate Trump's enemies and who will work to discredit the investigations into Trump. What's particularly concerning and troubling is that this isn't just about Kash Patel. He's just one example of a much broader and more systemic pattern in the Trump administration of appointing people based on personal loyalty to Trump rather than on their qualifications, their professional integrity, or their commitment to the rule of law and to their institutions. Trump has consistently chosen people who are personally loyal to him over people who are institutionally committed to their agencies and to the law. This creates a government where loyalty to Trump matters more than loyalty to the Constitution or the rule of law. This is exactly the opposite of what's supposed to happen in a constitutional republic where everyone, including the president, is supposed to be subordinate to law. But when the president appoints people based on personal loyalty, and when those people use the powers of their offices to advance the president's personal interests, then you get a system where the president begins to operate as though he's above the law. There are also very real concerns about what Kash Patel might specifically do with his authority over the FBI. Given his track record, his stated intentions, and his explicit loyalty to Trump, there's serious concern that he might use the FBI to investigate Trump's critics in the media, Trump's critics in Congress, Trump's critics in academia and think tanks, and Trump's critics in the bureaucracy. This would be a major and frightening step toward authoritarianism. In democratic countries, you're supposed to be able to criticize the government, to question the president's policies, to oppose the president's reelection, and to advocate for different policies without fear of government retaliation. Free speech and free press are supposed to be protected. But if Kash Patel uses the FBI to investigate and prosecute Trump's critics, that would fundamentally undermine free speech and free press in America and would transform America from a democracy into something closer to an authoritarian state. There's also concern about what might happen to ongoing investigations into Trump's conduct, into the conduct of Trump's allies, or into potential crimes committed by people in the Trump administration. If there are such investigations ongoing, will Kash Patel suppress these investigations or shut them down entirely? Given his explicit loyalty to Trump and his stated intentions, it seems quite likely that he would. This would mean that no one in the Trump administration could be held accountable for illegal conduct because law enforcement would be controlled by Trump loyalists. Let's talk about the broader implications and what this could mean for American democracy and for the future of the country. If Kash Patel is able to successfully politicize the FBI and turn it into a tool of Trump's political agenda, it will have lasting consequences for American democracy that could extend far beyond Trump's presidency. Future presidents might feel emboldened to do the same thing when they take office. You could end up with a dangerous cycle where every president uses law enforcement against the previous president's allies and supporters, where every change in administration is followed by investigations and prosecutions of the opposition party, and where the rule of law is replaced by rule by the president. This would eventually destroy the independence of these institutions and would transform America from a democracy governed by law into a country where the president's personal enemies are investigated and prosecuted for political reasons, while the president and his allies are protected from accountability. The institutions that we've built over more than 2 centuries to protect democracy, to protect individual rights, and to ensure that no one is above the law would be undermined and eventually destroyed. This is why so many people across the political spectrum are alarmed by what's happening with Kash Patel and the FBI. They understand that once you go down this road of politicizing law enforcement, it's very hard to come back. It's very hard to restore the independence of institutions once they've been corrupted by political loyalism. So, what's the path forward? What can be done to protect the independence of law enforcement and to preserve the rule of law? There are several possibilities. One possibility is that Congress exercises its oversight authority and investigates what's happening at the FBI under Kash Patel's leadership. Congress has the power to subpoena documents, to interview witnesses, and to hold public hearings. If Congress discovers that Kash Patel is using the FBI to investigate political enemies for partisan reasons or to suppress investigations that are unfavorable to Trump, Congress can take action, including potentially impeaching Patel or other officials. But this depends on congressional Republicans being willing to defend the independence of law enforcement and the rule of law, even if it means going against Trump. Given Trump's enormous control over the Republican Party and the pressure that Republican politicians face from Trump and from Trump supporters, this seems unlikely in the current political environment. Another possibility is that career law enforcement professionals at the FBI resist Patel's efforts to politicize the agency. There are thousands of career FBI employees who are committed to the rule of law and who might refuse to participate in investigations that they see as politically motivated or inappropriate. But this creates internal conflict, weakens the FBI, FBI and makes the FBI less effective at its core mission of protecting Americans. A third possibility is that courts intervene. If Kash Patel or others in the Trump administration use the FBI to investigate people for illegitimate political reasons, those people can challenge the investigations in court and argue that they're being targeted for political speech or for opposition to Trump. But courts move slowly, and by the time a court challenge works through the system, significant damage might have already been done. The bottom line is that Kash Patel's role at the FBI represents a serious threat to the rule of law and to American democracy. His track record shows that he prioritizes loyalty to Trump over commitment to the law or to institutional independence. His stated intentions suggest that he wants to use the FBI to investigate Trump's political enemies and to suppress investigations that are unfavorable to Trump. His appointment to a position of authority over the FBI creates a situation where the independence of law enforcement is at serious risk. This is causing turmoil in Washington, not because it's just political theater or partisan complaining, but because it represents a fundamental threat to how American democracy is supposed to work and to the institutions that protect our freedoms. If the president can use law enforcement agencies to investigate his political enemies and to suppress investigations into himself and his allies, then you no longer have rule of law. You have rule by the president, and that's not what America is supposed to be about. This situation with Kash Patel is also emblematic of broader concerns about the Trump administration's second term and about the direction the country is heading. Trump has shown a consistent pattern of appointing people based on loyalty rather than on qualifications, competence, or commitment to the rule of law. He's shown a pattern of wanting to use government agencies as tools to advance his personal interests and to punish his enemies. He's shown little respect for institutional independence or for the separation of powers that's supposed to constrain presidential power and protect against authoritarianism. All of this adds up to a picture of an administration that's willing to undermine the rule of law in service of the president's personal agenda. That's the situation with Kash Patel and the turmoil it's causing in Washington and throughout the country. It's a situation that will have major implications not just for Trump's presidency, but for American democracy and for the future of our country more broadly. I hope this breakdown has given you a clear understanding of what's happening, why it matters, what the implications are, and why so many people are deeply concerned. If you found this political analysis valuable and want to continue following the most important political developments happening in Washington and in your state capitals, please hit that like button and subscribe to USA News. I'm covering the critical stories that have major implications for our country and for our democracy. Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts on this situation and on what's happening with Kash Patel and the FBI. Do you think his appointment is a threat to the rule of law in America? Do you think Congress should investigate what's happening at the FBI? Do you think Trump is justified in appointing loyalists to positions of power? Do you think this represents a threat to democracy? I want to hear your perspective because that's what makes this community so valuable. We engage with these complex political issues from multiple angles and perspectives. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we continue analyzing the political forces, the institutional dynamics, and the constitutional questions that are shaping American government.